In 323 BC, Alexander the Great, who had built one of the largest empires in history, died. With no heir, wars soon broke out as his commanders and relatives fought for control of his empire. One commander, however, saw an opportunity rather than an end. After being made governor of Egypt, he declared himself pharaoh and founded a Hellenic dynasty that would rule Egypt for 300 years, ending with Queen Cleopatra. The man's name was Ptolemy I, Pharaoh of Ptolemaic, Egypt, known to history as King Ptolemy I Soter of Egypt. He was likely born in 367 BC. While there is no clear record of his birth, an ancient source, the Macedonian, attributed to Lucian of Samosata, claims Ptolemy died at 84 in 233 BC, which would place his birth around 367 BC. He was born in the kingdom of Macedon in northern Greece, which was becoming the dominant power in the Greek world at the time. Ptolemy's father was likely a Macedonian named Lagus, from a modest family in the Eordia region of western Macedonia. Despite his humble origins, Lagus married a Macedonian noblewoman related to the royal Argead dynasty, which claimed descent from the legendary hero Heracles. However, there is another theory about Ptolemy's parentage. The 2nd century Greek geographer, Pausanias, mentions a tradition in his famous work, Travelogue of the Greek World. According to this tradition, Ptolemy's father was not Lagus, but instead King Philip II, who became ruler of Macedon in 359 BC. According to tradition, Arsinoe, Ptolemy's mother, was one of Philip's courtesans and was pregnant with Philip's child when she married Lagus. However, the claim that Ptolemy was Philip II's illegitimate son, and thus Alexander the Great's half-brother, was likely fabricated by Ptolemy later in life. This was probably when he sought to claim the throne after Alexander's death. Had Ptolemy truly been Alexander's half-brother, Alexander would likely have seen him as a threat to his rule. Instead of promoting him to a top general, Alexander might have had him killed. Instead, Ptolemy became a general in Cyprus and later a priest in the cult of Alexander in Alexandria. No other siblings are mentioned in historical records. At the time of Ptolemy's birth, Macedon was emerging as a major power in the Greek world. The ruling Argead dynasty had controlled much of northern Greece and North Macedonia since the early 7th century BC. However, the Macedonians were seen as rustic and semi-barbaric by the more sophisticated Greeks of the city-states, unlike the hoplite soldiers of the Greek polis. Over time, the culture of city-states like Athens, Sparta, Thebes, and Corinth spread north, and the Macedonians became more integrated into Greek culture and society. Additionally, the wealthy city-states to the south of Macedon were now vulnerable to conquest. In 404 BC, Sparta defeated Athens in the Peloponnesian War, which had lasted 27 years, leaving all sides exhausted. Spartan dominance over the Greek city-states ended in 371 BC, when their armies were defeated by the Boeotian League, led by Thebes, at the Battle of Leuctra. When King Philip II became ruler of Macedon in 359 BC, he aimed to make Macedon the dominant power in the Greek world. He built a powerful military by creating a professional army and adopting new tactics. Philip developed the Macedonian phalanx, a formation of soldiers armed with shields and long spears called the sarissa, giving them an advantage in close combat. He also formed the elite companion cavalry, made up of nobles and the king's close allies, which often played a crucial role in battle. After securing control over the Thracian tribes through military action and diplomacy, Philip focused on the south. In wars like the Olympian War and the Fourth Sacred War, he replaced Thebes and the Boeotian League as the dominant power in central Greece and the Peloponnesus. Ptolemy grew up in a politically and militarily charged environment. Like other Macedonian boys, he learned to write, hunt, and speak Greek. At 14, around 353 BC, he was likely sent to serve as a royal page at King Philip II's court in Macedon. The Macedonian court was less cultured compared to places like Athens or Corinth. Known for their heavy drinking and tough lifestyle, the Macedonians' customs, such as polygamy, shocked the rest of the Greek world. Macedonian kings married multiple wives to strengthen political alliances, both domestically and abroad. Despite speaking Greek, the Macedonians were considered barbarians, possibly due to their difficult-to-understand accent. At court, Ptolemy would have continued military training and, by his late teens, may have served in Philip's military campaigns, though this is not confirmed. Ptolemy became a close companion of Philip's son, Alexander, who was born in 356 BC and was only 3 years old when Ptolemy arrived in polygamy. Around 343 BC, Philip hired the philosopher Aristotle, Plato's intellectual successor, to tutor the teenage Alexander in polygamy. Ptolemy, in his mid-20s at the time, likely did not study directly with Aristotle, but education and scholarship would become a major part of his legacy as king of Egypt. Aristotle's arrival in polygamy reflects how Macedon was evolving into a more cosmopolitan kingdom. This period also highlights the importance of assessing the sources we have about Ptolemy and the gaps in our knowledge. The primary source for the first part of his life, up to Alexander the Great's death, is the Anabasis of Alexander, which covers Ptolemy's life until he was in his early to mid-40s. The conquest of the Persian Empire by Alexander the Great and his campaign into Central Asia and India is extensively documented by Arriani of Nicomedia, a Greek historian from the 2nd century AD. Anabasis refers to a lengthy campaign or expedition in ancient Greek. Arriani used the writings of Ptolemy as key source material for his work. Ptolemy, who later became a historian, contributed much to historical records. However, most of his writings have been lost, with only fragments remaining, preserved by later scholars like Arriani. Plutarch, a contemporary of Arriani, also wrote about this period. He authored a biography of Demetrius, one of Ptolemy's rivals after Alexander's death and the empire's fragmentation. Ptolemy appears frequently in Plutarch's account of Demetrius. Closer to Ptolemy's time, Polybius and another Greek historian, both from the 2nd and 1st centuries BC, wrote universal histories of the world. These works discuss Alexander's conquests and the wars fought by the rulers of the Hellenistic kingdoms that followed him. Ptolemy and his family are mentioned in these histories as well. Ancient texts, including rumors, provide insights into Ptolemy's reign in Egypt, with some details mentioned almost incidentally. For example, the 2nd century BC letter of Aristeas to Philocrates gives one of the most informative accounts of how Alexandria, the capital of Ptolemy's kingdom, became a major center of learning in the 3rd century BC. In addition, many inscriptions on temples, civic buildings, and other archaeological sources from Ptolemy's reign offer further information about his rule, as is common with long-reigning rulers of ancient times. It is a great pity that Ptolemy's histories, like many other ancient works, have not survived. In the middle of the 4th century BC, as a young man, Ptolemy began rising through the ranks of the Macedonian army. In 339 BC, in response to Athenian and Theban resistance against Macedon's growing influence, King Philip marched on southern Greece. In the summer of 338 BC, the Macedonians faced a Greek coalition at Chaeronea near Thebes. The 18-year-old Alexander commanded the left wing of the Macedonian army, and Ptolemy may have been one of his officers. During the battle, Alexander broke through the sacred band, a 300-man elite Theban infantry unit. The following year, Philip summoned the Greek states to Corinth. forcing them to swear oaths to each other and him, establishing himself as the hegemon of the Greek world. Ptolemy was about 30 years old and a trusted courtier to both Philip and Alexander. In 337 BC, he temporarily lost his position at court when Alexander planned to marry the daughter of Pixodorus, the satrap of Caria, in what is now southwestern Turkey. Ptolemy, along with 4 other advisors, supported the marriage offer despite the king's objections. Furious, King Philip removed those involved from Pella. It is unclear where Ptolemy and the others went, but they may have returned to the capital by the time Philip was assassinated by one of his bodyguards in October 336 BC. The circumstances of Philip's death remain unclear, and it might have been the result of a palace coup. After his father's sudden death, 20-year-old Alexander became king of Macedon, eventually earning the title Alexander the Great due to his military success. The young king faced a revolt from the southern Greeks, but quickly defeated them, re-establishing the League of Corinth. In 335 BC, while securing his power at home by removing rivals, Alexander led campaigns against the Triballi and the Illyrians to the north and west of Macedonia. Ptolemy likely accompanied Alexander, as he described these campaigns in his histories, which were later included in the works of Arrian and Abbas. While fighting the Illyrians, Alexander received news of another revolt. He marched south with 30,000 infantry and 3,000 cavalry, according to Ptolemy's account, which was also passed down by Arrian. The Macedonians captured the city with heavy losses after General Perdiccas, leading the vanguard, attacked without waiting for orders from Alexander. The Alarus Seculus does not mention Perdiccas's premature attack, suggesting Ptolemy may have wanted to discredit him. This is likely due to Perdiccas later becoming a major rival to Ptolemy during the bloody civil wars that followed Alexander's death. After capturing Thebes, Alexander ordered the city to be destroyed, and it remained in ruins for 2 decades. He then focused on invading Asia, a plan his father Philip had started before his assassination. Alexander left Greece under the control of his loyal general, Antipater. In the spring of 334 BC, he led an army of at least 35,000 infantry and cavalry across the Hellespont to Asia. Upon arrival, he joined forces with 10,000 men led by General Parmenion, who had been in Asia Minor since 336 BC, preparing for the campaign. Ptolemy fought alongside the infantry, but his exact role remains unclear. Together with his close companions, Alexander was now set to conquer the Persian Empire. Asia Minor, now known as Turkey, had been under Persian rule since the 6th century BC, part of the vast Achaemenid Empire, a group that emerged from Persia, modern-day Iran, in the 500s and 50s BC, quickly conquered most of the known world. Their empire spanned across present-day Iran, Iraq, Turkey, the Levant, Egypt, parts of northern Arabia, the Caucasus, and even parts of Central Asia, including Afghanistan and Pakistan. They also attempted to conquer mainland Greece, but were famously repelled during 2 invasions in the early 5th century BC. After 2 centuries of rivalry, Macedon rose as a new power, uniting the Greek city-states and becoming a formidable force against Persia. In 334 BC, Alexander the Great, continuing his father's vision, set out on a campaign to conquer Persia. This campaign involved battles with local satraps, or governors, who ruled Persian provinces on behalf of Darius III, the Persian king who had recently ascended to the throne. The campaign aimed to overthrow Darius III, who ruled from the Persian capitals of Susa and Persepolis in southern Iran. After crossing the Bosporus, Alexander's army faced a force raised by the local Persian satraps at the Granicus River. The Macedonian phalanxes easily defeated the lightly armed Persians, securing Alexander's first major victory. This victory, however, marked the beginning of a long and dangerous journey. Alexander's success alarmed King Darius III, who began raising a large army in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, to confront the Macedonian threat. As Darius marched north, the two armies met at the Battle of Issus in southern Turkey in November 333 BC. Alexander's army numbered around 40,000, while the Persians were said to have up to 500,000 men, though modern estimates suggest around 100,000. Ancient sources, including Ptolemy's account, describe the battle in detail, but there is no information about where Ptolemy was positioned or whether he commanded troops. Unable to engage the enemy in a direct battle, Alexander led his cavalry behind the Persian center to strike at Darius. Despite heavy pressure on the Macedonian infantry, Alexander stayed focused on his goal and pressed on toward Darius. As the cavalry cut through Darius's bodyguard, the Persian king panicked and fled the field. Seeing their king retreat, the Persian forces lost morale, causing their infantry and cavalry to scatter in chaos. The Macedonians advanced, slaughtering many of the fleeing enemies. Although Darius escaped, Alexander captured several of the royal family, including Darius's mother, wife, and 2 daughters. Alexander treated his captives with kindness, promising to protect them in Darius's absence. After marching south into Syria, Alexander's next goal was to neutralize the Persian fleet anchored at the port city of Tyre. The city was located on an island about half a mile off the shore, making it a natural defensive point. To besiege it, Alexander ordered the construction of a causeway, allowing his men to attack from land. The Tyrians held out for 6 months, but in the summer of 332 BC, Alexander captured the city by attacking both from land and sea. Alexander continued down the Mediterranean coast and captured Gaza after a brutal 2-month siege. His next target was Egypt, then a Persian province ruled by the satrap Mazakis. Though the Persians had ruled Egypt for nearly 2 centuries, their rule was unpopular. Mazakis knew he couldn't resist, so he surrendered to Alexander at the ancient capital of Memphis, south of present-day Cairo. Alexander was careful not to repeat Mazakis' mistake and respected Egyptian customs and religion. He gained popularity by restoring old Egyptian temples. While not formally crowned pharaoh, he made sacrifices to Egyptian gods and assumed royal titles and duties. Determined to visit the oracle of Amun-Ra in the Siwa oasis, Alexander traveled hundreds of miles west, near the border of modern-day Libya and Egypt. Amun-Ra, the creator god of the Egyptian pantheon, was linked to Zeus by the Greeks, who called him Zeus Ammon. Ptolemy was among the companions Alexander chose to accompany him on the journey from Memphis to the Siwa oasis. The group took a secure route via the Nile Delta and Egypt's northern coast, where Alexander founded the city of Alexandria. After marching west to the area now known as El Alamein, they turned south toward the oracle. After consulting the priest, Alexander declared to his companions that he was the son of Zeus Ammon. This was Ptolemy's first encounter with the land that he and his family would rule for nearly 3 centuries. While Alexander was in Egypt, the Persian king raised another large army to confront him. The 2 armies met at the Battle of Gaugamela in what is now northern Iraq on October 1st, 331 BC. Once again outnumbered, Alexander used tactics similar to those at Issus. He ordered his right flank to retreat, luring the Persian cavalry commander, Bessus, into making a premature attack. This created a gap in the Persian line, which Alexander exploited by leading his cavalry toward Darius. As the Persian king fled again, Alexander and his horsemen pursued him. They soon returned to the battlefield at Gaugamela to relieve Parmenion, who was struggling against the larger Persian force commanded by Medzias, satrap of Babylon. By the time Alexander arrived, the The crisis was over, as Mesias's men saw the king had abandoned them, allowing Parmenion to counterattack. After his victory at Gaugamela, Alexander marched south to Babylon, where he decided to keep the satrapy system and confirmed Mesias in his role. He then moved southeast toward the Persian heartland, capturing the royal capital of Susa in December. Alexander's next target was Persepolis, as Darius prepared a third army. Ariobarzanes, satrap of Persis, defended the Persian gates, a pass over the Zagros Mountains. Confined in a narrow defile, Alexander's army was attacked by the defending Persians. His progress stalled for a month, until a local shepherd told him about a mountain path to bypass Ariobarzanes' position. Ptolemy claimed Alexander gave him command of 3,000 men to attack the enemy in the center, while the king moved behind Ariobarzanes. However, Arrian suggests Ptolemy was stationed at the rear to prevent any Persians from escaping. By late January 330 BC, Alexander's army reached Persepolis. He ordered the destruction of the palace buildings linked to Xerxes the Great, the Persian king who had invaded Greece over a century before, resulting in the sack of Athens. One account suggests the destruction of Persepolis was influenced by an Athenian woman in Alexander's entourage named Thais, who later became one of Ptolemy's wives. After 3 months in Persepolis, Alexander resumed his pursuit of Darius, who was trying to raise a new army in Central Asia. Darius's string of military failures led to a rebellion, encouraged by his commander Bessos. Bessos had Darius killed and proclaimed himself King Artaxerxes V. Upon arriving in Central Asia, Alexander ordered Darius's body to be buried in Persepolis with full honors. As Alexander prepared to confront Bessos, he became the target of an assassination plot orchestrated by his friend Dimnos. Although Philotus, Parmenion's son and commander of the companion cavalry, was aware of the plot, he did not inform Alexander. Once Alexander discovered both the plot and Philotus's knowledge of it, he executed both Philotus and Parmenion for treason. Alexander's decision to eliminate them was likely motivated by their criticism of his increasing adherence to Persian customs instead of Greek traditions. Alexander promoted trusted friends to senior positions, with his closest companion, Ephestion, becoming one of the commanders of the companion cavalry. His role in commanding Macedonian forces during the Persian conquest is known, though the exact seniority of his position during this period is unclear. Most sources focus on Alexander, even those based on later histories, making it difficult to determine the full extent of his involvement. Even when sources mention Ptolemy, it is debatable how much we can trust them. Ptolemy, in later years, would have been eager to emphasize his own seniority among Alexander's companions. Sources like Arrian, which relied on Ptolemy's writings, may have fallen victim to his exaggerations. Despite these issues, it is generally agreed that the elimination of Parmenion and Philotus allowed Ptolemy to rise to a more prominent position in the Macedonian leadership in 330 BC. In the winter of 330 BC and 329 BC, Alexander's army faced harsh conditions while crossing the Hindu Kush, forcing Persian forces to retreat to Sogdiana, modern-day Uzbekistan. After capturing Bulk, Alexander prepared to cross the Oxus River, now Amudarya, into Sogdiana. Although Bessus destroyed the boats to block his passage, Alexander sent a message to the remaining Persian forces, offering friendship to anyone who could capture Bessus. 2 Sogdian chieftains, Spita Menes and Data Phenes, informed Alexander that they had captured Bessus. Alexander then gave Ptolemy his first independent command, sending him with 5,000 men to secure Bessus. Ptolemy brought Bessus to Alexander, who had him sent to Bulk. There, Bessus had his nose and ears cut off before being executed the following year. After surrendering Bessus, Spedamenus and Dodophenes rebelled against Alexander, starting a guerrilla war in Central Asia's mountains. Alexander responded with a pacification campaign and appointed Ptolemy to lead a detachment to restore order in the area. Meanwhile, Alexander faced growing criticism from his companions for adopting Eastern customs and staying in Asia. Many of his followers wanted to return home after conquering the Persian Empire. But Alexander seemed determined to push further east, to regions few Greeks or Macedonians had ever heard of, let alone visited. The discontent reached a breaking point in the summer of 328 BC, when Alexander's old friend, Ptolemy, who had saved his life at the Battle of the Granicus, drunkenly criticized both Alexander and his loyal companion Ptolemy, who enthusiastically supported the king's actions. As Alexander furiously rushed up to Clitus, Ptolemy intervened, dragging him out of the room. But as the king continued to shout curses, Ptolemy broke free from Ptolemy and ran back to continue the argument. Alexander quickly grabbed a spear from a bodyguard and killed Ptolemy on the spot. Amid the unrest over Alexander's actions, Ptolemy's position likely improved in the king's eyes, establishing himself as a steadfast supporter of Alexander's plans. This would later position Ptolemy well when the need for a successor arose. Meanwhile, the campaign in Central Asia was nearing its end. Alexander's troops achieved an extraordinary feat by capturing the Sogdian rock, scaling a sheer cliff face under the cover of darkness. Ptolemy also played a key role in the siege of Shorianus, a stronghold protected by a deep ravine which Alexander sought to bridge. Ptolemy was one of 3 men responsible for the night operations that allowed Alexander to build a wooden bridge and deploy his siege machines. In the spring of 327 BC, some of Alexander's friends encouraged him to marry a Greek woman. Ptolemy seems to have served as an intelligence officer, bringing information to the king about potential plots against him. Despite unrest, Alexander was determined to march east to India. In mid-327 BC, he split his army into 2 columns and marched toward the Indus River. Ptolemy led one column through the Swat Valley, where they encountered fierce resistance from the Aspasian people. During the next phase of the campaign, Ptolemy led Alexander's left flank at the siege of Arragim, while Leonatus commanded the Macedonian right. In Ptolemy's later account, Alexander and Leonatus quickly overcame enemy resistance, but Ptolemy himself faced a tougher challenge before he ultimately succeeded. During the final stage of his march to the Indus Valley, Alexander besieged several fortresses of the Assassinite people. At Massaga, the Macedonians killed the local king, prompting the queen to surrender. Ptolemy played a key role in the siege of the mountain fortress Ornas. He was stationed at a summit across a ravine, which Alexander bridged to capture the position. Alexander then moved towards the Hygaspi River to confront Porus, an Indian prince resisting his rule. Ptolemy joined Alexander in a flank attack, but it was poorly executed, leading Alexander to face the full enemy army. Despite this, Alexander won a decisive victory, captured Porus, and made him his vassal. Though Alexander pushed further east, his men refused to continue. He was finally persuaded to turn back. Alexander aimed to reach the Indian Ocean and build a fleet at the Hygaspes. However, after a storm damaged the fleet, he shifted focus to seize the city of Mali in Punjab. Alexander and a few senior officers scaled the enemy's citadel wall, but were stranded when the ladders collapsed. During the battle, the king was struck by an arrow in the neck, but was shielded by an officer named Peucestus. Meanwhile, the rest of the army stormed the gates and massacred the garrison. Arrian refers to Ptolemy as the man who protected Alexander, which led to him gaining the nickname Soter, meaning savior. This nickname stuck, and he became known as Ptolemy Soter. It also set a precedent for members of the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt, who adopted regional names with added titles. The acquisition of the Soter name marked one of the final actions of the India campaign. Shortly after, Alexander, Ptolemy, and the Macedonians headed back west towards Persia. In the spring of 324 BC, in Susa, Alexander organized a mass marriage between his senior officers and numerous Persian noblewomen. This aimed to blend Macedonian and Persian nobility, creating a more unified empire. Alexander married 2 Persian princesses, while Ptolemy married Artacama, the daughter of the Persian nobleman Artabazus. Ptolemy, however, didn't seem fond of his Persian wife and may have divorced her after Alexander's death. Tensions worsened in the summer of 324 BC when Alexander dismissed his veteran army, allowing them to return home as they had hoped. Alexander suffered a personal tragedy with the death of his appointed second-in-command, Perdiccas, who was sent to bring his body to Babylon for a grand funeral. In early 323 BC, Alexander traveled to Babylon to prepare for a campaign into the Arabian Peninsula. Although he had sustained several battle wounds, he had remained healthy. However, in mid-323 BC, Alexander suddenly fell ill and died in June, just weeks before his 33rd birthday. At the time, he had a 4-year-old son, Heracles, born to his Persian mistress, Pasina. She was also several months pregnant, but there was no certainty the child would survive. Regardless, the vast empire Alexander had built could not be maintained during the long minority rule of a child who had not yet been born. The question of how to resolve the political situation after Alexander's suspicious death would shape Ptolemy's life. Before his death, Alexander summoned Perdiccas and gave him his signet ring to act on his behalf. As Alexander's condition worsened, his generals gathered and asked who should succeed him. The king reportedly answered, "To the best," and died shortly after. This account has been disputed by modern historians, who point out that Alexander had an elder half-brother, Arrhidaeus, who was expected to continue the royal line. Although Arrhidaeus suffered from mental incapacitation, he could still perform royal duties under a regency. As Alexander's deputy, Perdiccas took charge and convened a meeting with the generals and bodyguards to decide the succession. Perdiccas proposed a regency until Roxana's child, assumed to be a son, came of age. Others also claimed the right to act as regent. Ptolemy opposed all candidates, suggesting a council of equals to govern as satraps. This idea and others were rejected until one of the attendees supported Arrhidaeus. An officer named Malaga then brought Arrhidaeus in and declared him King Philip III. A compromise was reached where Arrhidaeus would be king, and if Roxana had a son, they would rule jointly. Perdiccas would remain second in command, with Malaga as his deputy. However, Perdiccas soon ignored the agreement by sidelining King Philip and removing Malaga. He declared himself regent and agreed to Malaga's plan to divide the empire into satrapies, aiming to isolate and eliminate his rivals one by one. Ptolemy became the satrap of Egypt as part of this arrangement. He suddenly ruled one of the richest and most cultured regions, the cradle of one of the oldest civilizations. The surrounding desert and Nile Delta marshes made Egypt easier to defend, providing Ptolemy a strong base to build his power as rivals clashed elsewhere. Wars soon broke out. After Alexander's death, the Greeks rebelled against Macedonian rule. Antipater and Craterus, 2 of Alexander's former companions, teamed up to crush the uprising and enforce direct rule. Alarmed by their army, Perdiccas prepared to fight them. Ptolemy stayed in Babylon with Perdiccas for several months during this time. Roxana gave birth to a son, Alexander, who was declared King Alexander IV alongside his half-uncle Philip III, as previously agreed. Ptolemy likely arrived in Egypt in 322 BC. As Egypt's ruler, he followed Alexander's example, promoting the country's traditional religion. Initially governing from Memphis, Ptolemy later moved to Alexandria, which was still being built when he began his reign. To strengthen his influence on the Mediterranean coast, Ptolemy formed an alliance with Cyprus and took advantage of a political dispute in Cyrenaica, modern-day Libya, to bring the region under Egyptian control. In the summer of 321 BC, Ptolemy learned that after 2 years of preparing a lavish casket and carriage, Perdiccas was ready to transport Alexander's body from Mesopotamia to Macedonia. In September 321 BC, Ptolemy executed a bold plan to steal Alexander's remains from Damascus, claiming that the king's final wish was to be buried at the oracle of Zeus Ammon in the sea-war oasis, a place Alexander had visited in 331 BC. However, after seizing the body, Ptolemy did not take it to the oracle, instead placing it in a temporary tomb in Memphis before transferring it to Alexandria to solidify his own power. Ptolemy's actions directly challenged the authority of Perdiccas, who launched an invasion of Egypt in mid-320 BC, claiming to act in the name of the two kings. Despite his army beginning to dissolve soon after crossing into Egypt, Perdiccas pressed on towards Memphis and attacked the nearby Camel Fort. However, Ptolemy successfully defended the fort, holding off Perdiccas' forces. Perdiccas marched directly on Memphis, but his men struggled to swim across the Nile, with many drowning due to their heavy armor. After ordering a retreat, those who had crossed the river saw their comrades' plight and tried to swim back without their armor. Many were reportedly eaten by crocodiles. With his army in disarray, Perdiccas was soon killed by 2 of his subordinates, Seleucus and Pathon. Ptolemy treated Perdiccas' men generously and presented gifts to the joint kings, Philip and Alexander, which led Philip III to confirm his status as satrap of Egypt. Ptolemy was offered the regency but refused, staying in Egypt with Alexander's body while the 2 kings returned to Macedonia. After Perdiccas' death, Alexander's surviving generals met at Tripadessus in Syria in 320 BC to establish a new arrangement. Alexander IV was still an infant, and Philip III was not capable of ruling on his own, so a new regent was needed. The meeting, chaired by the elderly Antipater, concluded that he would temporarily become regent due to his age. Antigonus, formerly the satrap of Phrygia in Asia Minor, inherited Parmenion's armies in Asia. Meanwhile, Parmenion's assassins and Lucas were made satraps of Babylon. Ptolemy was confirmed as the satrap of Egypt, strengthening his ties to Antipater by marrying his daughter Eurydice in 320 BC. 3 years later, Ptolemy married Eurydice's niece and adopted the polygamous practices promoted by Alexander, with at least 4 wives during his lifetime. The following year, Antipater died, and his son Cassander eventually succeeded him as regent of Greece and Macedon. Cassander soon seized Olympias, Alexander the Great's mother, and had her executed. He placed the infant King Alexander IV and Roxana under house arrest while presenting himself as their protector. Ptolemy III was killed during these events. By the early 310s BC, former companions of Alexander, along with figures like Cassandra and Seleucus, who had not truly known the Macedonian king, emerged as powerful players in the civil war. They abandoned the pretense of waiting for Alexander's son to come of age and were clearly aiming to carve out their own territories in the empire. The civil wars that began during this time, known as the Wars of the Diadochi, meaning successors in ancient Greek, would last for 4 decades, throughout the remainder of Ptolemy's life. In the years that followed, Antigonus gained control of Mesopotamia, Syria, and surrounding regions, forcing Seleucus to seek protection from Ptolemy. Seleucus warned that Antigonus planned to become the sole ruler of Alexander's empire and was preparing an invasion of Egypt. In 315 BC, Ptolemy formed an alliance with Cassandra and Lysimachus, satrap of Thrace, and demanded Seleucus be reinstated in Mesopotamia. Around this time, Ptolemy moved his capital from Memphis to Alexandria for a more strategic position in northern Egypt. While Antigonus tried to undermine Ptolemy's allies in Cyprus, an Egyptian fleet led by Seleucus defeated Antigonus's fleet in 313 BC, gaining control of the island. In late 312 BC, Ptolemy fought Antigonus's forces near Gaza. He neutralized the enemy's war elephants by attacking from below with javelins, a tactic Alexander had used against Indian elephants at the Battle of the Hydaspes. Ptolemy captured 8,000 enemy troops and retook Gaza. However, these gains were short-lived as Antigonus prepared to unite with his son to exact revenge on Ptolemy. Rather than risk a battle, Ptolemy retreated to Egypt. By 311 BC, after exhausting all options, Seleucus retook Babylon and declared himself general of Asia, opposing Antigonus. After another round of peace talks, Antigonus lost much of his territory, and a temporary ceasefire was established. Since none of the Diadochi wanted to give up their lands, there were no objections when Cassandra arranged the poisoning of Alexander IV and his mother, Roxana, in 310 BC. With Alexander IV's death, the Arya dynasty, which had ruled Macedonia for over 300 years, came to an end. The Diadochi, including Ptolemy, were now free from the pretense of ruling as satraps who would one day hand power back to Alexander IV. This marked the emergence of Ptolemy as King Ptolemy I of Egypt. His regional title was King Ptolemy I Soter, a name he earned after saving Alexander the Great's life. The peace agreement of 311 BC was seen as temporary, as all sides prepared for renewed conflict. Ptolemy secured his position in Egypt and promoted himself as Alexander's successor by placing Alexander's remains in the heart of his new capital, Alexandria. Founded by Alexander in April 331 BC, the city was designed by the architect Dinocrates of Rhodes. The early construction focused on defense and trade, and the city was connected to the nearby island of Pharos via a causeway. After bringing Alexander's body to Alexandria, Ptolemy built a monument called the Sema and established a religious cult to honor Alexander as a god. A century later, Ptolemy IV replaced the Sema with a new mosaic, which was integrated into the palace complex and became the royal tomb for the entire Ptolemy dynasty. Ptolemy founded the city of Ptolemais near Thebes, which became his capital in southern Upper Egypt. Along with Alexandria and the nearby trading port of Naucratis, Ptolemais was one of 3 cities in Egypt with Greek city-state status, each having its own elected officials. While Alexander the Great ordered the creation of numerous cities named Alexandria during his campaigns, the Alexandria he founded in northern Egypt would eventually become the most prominent, under the patronage of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Ptolemy transformed Alexandria into one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. However, his ambition stretched beyond Egypt. In 30 BC, after consolidating power in Egypt and Cyrenaica and strengthening his military, he resumed hostilities in the Wars of the Diadochi. Despite these claims, Ptolemy found little support among the Greeks and returned to Egypt. Though he retained partial control of Corinth and strengthened his dominance over the eastern Mediterranean. Over the following years, conflicts intensified in the region, particularly over territories like Rhodes and Cyprus. Ptolemy had gained control of Cyprus early in the Diadochi Wars. In 307 BC, Antigonus sent his son to seize Athens and later launched an attack on Cyprus. The campaign succeeded, and Ptolemy temporarily lost control of the island. After his victory in 306 BC, Antigonus and Demetrius declared themselves kings. Ptolemy and Cassander, already de facto kings, followed suit by minting coins with their images. Despite his naval defeat at Cyprus, Ptolemy regrouped at Pelusium, near modern-day Port Said, and prepared for a large invasion force of over 80,000 men under the joint command of Antigonus and Demetrius. A combination of poor weather and Ptolemy's tactic of encouraging enemy troops to defect with bribes forced Antigonus and Demetrius to retreat. It is possible that at this time Ptolemy began formally using the epithet Soter, which he had acquired years earlier. It is more likely, however, that Ptolemy began using this name officially in 304 BC, after he defended Rhodes from Demetrius's invasion. In gratitude, the Rhodians established a religious cult in Ptolemy's honor. After failing to take Rhodes, Demetrius strengthened his position in Greece at Cassandra's expense. Ptolemy, Lysimachus, and Seleucus renewed their alliance with Cassandra and attacked Antigonus in Asia Minor, forcing him to recall his son from Greece. Meanwhile, Ptolemy recaptured Syria and Phoenicia. In 301 BC, Lysimachus led a coalition army to victory against Antigonus and Demetrius at the Phrygian town of Ipsus, where Antigonus was killed. Ptolemy, Lysimachus, and Seleucus, the last three surviving generals of Alexander, divided Antigonus's vast empire between themselves. Lysimachus took control of the western half of Asia Minor, while Seleucus claimed the rest of Antigonus's territory, extending to Central Asia. Ptolemy's gains in Syria were modest, and his relationship with Seleucus was strained over a dispute concerning Phoenicia, particularly the cities of Tyre and Sidon. In the early 190s BC, Ptolemy formed a marriage alliance with Lysimachus, while Seleucus reached out to Demetrius. Not long after, Seleucus and Demetrius unexpectedly sought reconciliation with Ptolemy. As part of the agreement, Demetrius sent King Paris of Epirus to Alexandria as a hostage to ensure his good behavior. Ptolemy and Demetrius were soon at war again after events in Greece. Following Cassandra's death in 297 BC, he was succeeded by his eldest son, Philip IV, who ruled briefly before dying. Philip IV's death led to the kingdom being jointly ruled by Cassandra's younger sons, Typhon and Alexander V. In response, Ptolemy restored Perus to his throne in Epirus, which he had lost after the Battle of Ipsus. Epirus, located in present-day southern Albania, bordered Macedonia to the west, allowing Perus to intervene in Macedonia's affairs. Demetrius also became involved in these conflicts and emerged as king of Macedonia in 294 BC. By this time, the Diadochi's wars were nearing their end. Maintaining large armies was becoming increasingly difficult, and new challenges were arising in the west. Perus of Epirus would soon be drawn into defending the Greeks of southern Italy against the rising power of the Roman Republic. Ptolemy took advantage of Demetrius's absence in Macedonia to regain control of the eastern Mediterranean. He captured Cyprus, which remained under his control until the 1st century BC. At the same time, Ptolemy seized the wealthy trading cities of Sidon and Tyre in the Levant, along with parts of Asia Minor loyal to Demetrius. After a few years of peace, Demetrius raised an army of around 100,000 men to invade Asia and was ready by 288 BC. In response, Ptolemy invaded Greece, while Lysimachus and Paris launched a two-pronged attack on Macedonia, dividing the kingdom between themselves. Though Demetrius captured the Peloponnese and laid siege to Athens in 287 BC, Ptolemy and Paris supported the Athenians and expelled Demetrius from Greece. Demetrius then crossed into Asia Minor, seizing a few towns, but was ultimately defeated in battle in 285 BC. He sought refuge with Seleucus, but was imprisoned and died in captivity in 283 BC. The Wars of the Diadochi ended in the late 280s BC, with Ptolemy securing a position as king of Egypt. He controlled Cyrenaica in Libya, Cyprus, the Sinai Peninsula, large parts of the Levant, and several islands in the Aegean Sea. The two other major successor states were the Seleucid Empire, which covered Syria, Mesopotamia, parts of Persia and Asia Minor, and the Kingdom of Macedon, which remained the weakest of the three. Many regions of Alexander's former empire became independent again, notably the kingdoms of Central Asia and the Greek city-states on the mainland. By the time the wars ended, Ptolemy was around 80 years old and in poor health. His career, after Alexander's death, was marked by constant conflict with rivals, interrupted only by brief periods of peace lasting no more than a few years. Although ancient sources provide limited information on how Ptolemy managed state affairs, his reign was marked by stability and prosperity. He carefully balanced the interests of both the Macedonian and native Egyptian populations. Although he moved his capital to Alexandria and founded Ptolemais to expand his influence up the Nile, he respected Egyptian traditions, making sacrifices to the Egyptian gods. Ptolemy notably developed the cult of the god Serapis, a dual Greco-Egyptian deity. This reflects his broader approach to governance, where he created a dual Hellenistic kingdom blending Greeks and Macedonians with Egyptians. While Greeks were the ruling elite, their arts and architecture adapted to local customs. As a result, many temple wall friezes, statues, and death masks from this period depict Ptolemy and his achievements in the traditional style of Egyptian pharaohs. Greek was the language of state administration, and Ptolemy favored Macedonian and Greek troops over native Egyptian soldiers. Alexandria became the symbol of the new kingdom, a cosmopolitan city with large populations of Greeks, Jews, Egyptians, and other groups from Asia, Europe, and Africa. There is debate about whether Ptolemy I founded the Museum and Library of Alexandria, or if it was his son Ptolemy II, who was born around 309 BC to Ptolemy and his wife Berenice. The library, part of the Macedonian complex in central Alexandria, attracted scholars from across the Mediterranean. The foundation for the library and museum was likely laid by Ptolemy I in the 290s or 280s BC, but it reached its full potential under Ptolemy II. Ptolemy I allowed scholars to pursue their research independently. He made an exception for the mathematician Euclid, who wrote his seminal Elements, a foundational text in geometry and mathematics, while living in Alexandria around 300 BC under the king's patronage. The library's construction remained incomplete at the end of Ptolemy I's reign, and it was up to his son, Ptolemy II, to finish it and organize it as the world's repository of knowledge. Ptolemy I was also responsible for building the Lighthouse of Pharos, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The lighthouse, completed except for the pyramids of Giza, had a reflective mirror during the day and a burning furnace at night. Its light was visible up to 40 miles away, helping ships safely navigate into the harbor. During wartime, the lighthouse also served as a warning system, signaling the approach of enemy ships. Ptolemy was responsible for the design and construction work, which may have started in 1997 BC. However, the project remained unfinished at his death and was completed by his successor. Ptolemy died around 84 years old, but due to his use of 2 different dating systems, it is unclear whether he passed away in 283 BC or 282 BC. He was succeeded by his son, Ptolemy II, who was in his early 20s at the time. Ptolemy II's mother, Berenice, was Ptolemy's 4th and most influential wife. Ptolemy II may have already been made joint ruler with his father in 285 BC, after displacing his elder half-brother Ptolemy Coronis, the son of Eurydice, who had been Ptolemy I's preferred successor. At the time of Ptolemy I's death, his realm was at its greatest extent, though the wars of the successors were not yet fully over. The death of Lucas in 281 BC marked the end of the Wars of the Successors, more than 40 years after Alexander's death. In 276 BC, Antigonus Granatus, son of Antigonus and grandson of the first Antigonus, defeated his rivals and established the Antigonid dynasty. This dynasty ruled Macedonia and parts of Greece until its conquest by Rome in 168 BC. The Seleucid Empire lasted until 63 BC, when it was conquered by the Roman general Pompey, leaving Ptolemaic Egypt as the longest-lasting successor state to Alexander the Great's empire. Ptolemaic Egypt's decline is marked by Queen Cleopatra VII, who became the lover of both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony in succession. She sought to maintain her kingdom's relationship with the growing Roman Republic. Her death in 30 BC, following the civil war between Mark Antony and Octavian, Caesar's successor, marked the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty and the beginning of the Roman Empire. Thus, the Ptolemaic dynasty was bookended by the fall of Alexander the Great's empire on one side and the rise of the Roman Empire on the other. Ptolemy I Soter began his life in the remote region of western Macedonia and ended it as the king of Egypt. His maternal connections to the Macedonian elite helped him rise to prominence at court and become a trusted companion of Alexander the Great. While he served as Alexander's bodyguard and participated in many battles, it is unclear how senior his position was during Alexander's lifetime. He may have later exaggerated his closeness to the king, with his own accounts influencing later writers like Arrian. After Alexander's death, Ptolemy emerged as a key figure, first proposing the division of the empire and claiming Egypt as his satrapy. He further asserted his ambitions by stealing Alexander's body, using it to strengthen his claim as the rightful successor to the great king. It was likely during this period that he created the spurious claim, asserting he was Alexander's half-brother, to strengthen his bid for the throne. As a military leader, he succeeded in eliminating Perdiccas and held his ground against figures like Antigonus, Demetrius, and Seleucus for decades. He gained control of the key islands of Cyprus and Rhodes, but failed to achieve his goal of becoming king of Macedon. Despite the inability of individuals like Ptolemy to win the wars of the Diadochi, his efforts laid the foundation for a dynastic state in Egypt that lasted nearly 3 centuries. Most significantly, under his leadership, Alexandria rose as the greatest city in the ancient world, a hub of learning in the Mediterranean that remained the intellectual center of the Eastern Mediterranean even after the rise of Rome. Ptolemy I Soter is often seen as a competent military and political leader, but his legacy is mixed. He certainly helped stabilize Egypt after Alexander the Great's empire fragmented, consolidating power and maintaining prosperity. However, his claim to be the legitimate successor to Alexander's empire is more contentious. While he ruled effectively over Egypt, his reach never fully extended to the broader territories that Alexander had conquered. His success can be viewed as partial, since he did not manage to unite the entire empire under his rule. But he certainly left a stable and thriving kingdom for his successors.